Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Sit comfortably because today we have another set of crazy stories for you. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. Don't sue. We'll let you come onto our property to fix your sewer line. The house I grew up in was built on the side of a hill. Great views, but the geography posed some challenges for the city utilities, sewage in particular. Their solution was to put all the houses on the hill into what's called a shared line. Essentially, one big pipe ran through all of our backyards, just below the house's basements. Effluent would flow out from the houses into the shared pipe and then down the hill to the city sewer line by the bottommost house. When we moved in, we were at the highest point that was possible to build on and still be a part of that shared sewer line. But a few years later, somebody bought a lot just over the crest of the hill and linked up with ours without being part of the planned community that had an HOA that took care of the sewer line, among other things. And in fact, they did so without the homeowner association approval. So for the next 2 decades, my family would be the subject of near constant harassment over the state of the sewer. Their end of the line was lower than ours by just enough that it would stop flowing and clog, often backing up into their basement, bathroom, and shower. They'd accuse us of diverting our effluent to their line, because I guess we were some kind of plumbing wizards. Now, the reason nobody built a house on that part of the hill during the original development was that the soil was unstable, something hydrology related. Sure enough, over the years, that house would occasionally separate from the hill and slide down a couple of inches. But our neighbors had connections in the code enforcement agency, so the place never got condemned like it should be. They just had to shore it up and reconnect all the utilities. The thing is, the further down the house moved, the steeper the negative incline was from their sewer connection to our junction box, making the clogs and backups even worse. At one point, it got so bad that their sewer barely flowed. Some days it got completely clogged. Somehow this was our fault. They spent the next year calling us every time they tried to flush a toilet and crap came out in their downstairs shower. They called a plumber who said they had to redo their part of the shared line, and to do it, they'd have to bust through our 2-story masonry wall so they could get a backhoe onto our property and dig out the line. Of course, we had issues with this. We said, no, you will not come into our property and tear it up with a big old piece of construction equipment. Hire human laborers or something. But instead, they hired lawyers who started slinging paper around. According to them, we were in violation of state law that specifically gave an implied easement granting a homeowner access through another's property to maintain their own. So we hired lawyers of our own who said that we basically had a choice. We could win the case but pay a ton of money, or just let it happen. Either way, we'd be screwed. But they did point out one important fact, that 20-year-old masonry wall wasn't in the greatest of shape anyway, so a few months later, we presented them with a bill for $75,000 for the rebuilding of the wall, installation of a new set of stairs, replacement of the entire wrought iron fence that had separated the two properties, resodding, replacement of ornamental plants and shrubs, and some minor repairs to our sewer, which they had borked up while relaying their pipes. I'm not a general contractor, but my guess is they could have hired pick and shovel labor to dig out that pipe and replace it with a new one for a fraction of that price. But no, they had to have a giant Caterpillar tread machine do it. They balked. But then we handed them a Xerox copy of the letter that their lawyers had sent us with, pursuant to paragraph blah 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 of the Common Code blah blah blah, citing the next paragraph, which stated that the person using the easement was 100% responsible for any damage that might be caused. They still balked, but my parents put a lien on their property that stayed there to the day they tried to sell, at which point they had to pay up or the purchaser's creditors wouldn't underwrite a mortgage. I think they had to pay interest too, but I'm not 100% sure about that. And our next story. How my old boss ended up buying the customer a new shed. I do tree work for a living, and the last boss I had was the kind of guy who thought he knew everything and demanded that you did things his way when he was on site. The day this story takes place was no different than any other time that boss decided to show up. We were there to drop a massive sunburst locust tree, over 3 feet wide at the trunk and branches that spanned over 60 feet. was a beautiful tree, but the customer wanted it gone, sadly. The customer had a brand new, empty shed on one side of his property. There was enough room to drop the tree, but only if aimed just right. I set a pull rope into the tree and had my crew set our winch up on a tree along the back line of the lot to pull the locust over. My boss was not happy with my choice of felling direction and demanded in his "I want to speak to your manager" voice that my guys move the winch to a tree 40 feet to the right and told me I was to aim the tree in his newly selected direction, directly towards the shed. I told him that was a bad idea, but he wouldn't listen. He wanted to show the customer that he had absolute power over us and used one of his favorite lines, "If you don't want to be here, then leave." He knew I was wearing golden handcuffs and leaving wasn't financially responsible of me with a young family at home. I accepted that he was not going to allow me or my guys to put the winch anywhere close to where it should have been and set to putting my notch into the tree. I started aiming the tree to where I knew it should have been aimed, but was again screamed at by my boss because I wasn't following his direct orders. This is where I finally gave in and aimed the tree directly towards where he wanted me to, towards the shed. My aim could not have been more true. The notch and cutback were absolutely textbook. My guys applied power to the winch, and we put that tree down exactly where it was aimed. The new vinyl shed. It exploded. My boss did too. The customer calmly walked out, put his hand on my shoulder, looked directly at my boss, and exclaimed, "Sean did exactly what you told him to. When will you be installing my new shed?" I walked away from the two of them immediately, as I didn't need to be directly in the middle of that conversation when I knew I still needed to get the tree from the backyard and into the truck. Things then got even worse for my boss. He was the kind of boss to shout orders but not actually do anything himself. That day he decided to try to help out by taking the climbing saw, which is not set up to be used on the ground, and start hacking away at branches using only one hand on the saw. Very dangerous. We all knew that we'd get screamed at if we said anything to him, so we did our best to stay clear of the whirling dervish and do what we could at a safe distance. 5 or so minutes into his arbor assault, I hear him start screaming and see a chainsaw flying across the yard. Remember earlier where I said what he was doing was dangerous? The saw kicked back at him and he put his left hand up as a reaction, damn near cutting off 3 fingers from his left hand. We managed to get that idiot bandaged up and driven off to the hospital, where the med staff were able to save the fingers that eventually had to build the customer a new shed. And our last story. That time they threatened to dock my pay $2,500. A few years back, I worked for a big box store that was mostly general goods but had a grocery section and an obsession with the color red. The retail store also has a policy of pulling floor staff up to work the registers when it's busy. It's a mandatory policy. At the time of this incident, there was a new front-end manager, we'll call her L, and a new guest experience manager, we'll call him T, both of whom were ready to lay the law and wield what little middle management power they could in the perpetual absence of the paycheck collection store manager. The precursor to my own MC incident was a day like any other. When the call came out needing assistance at the registers, I was reasonably free at the time and had a second person in the grocery department with me, so I responded. After about 10 minutes, the rush ended, the regular cashiers had lines under 3, and I turned off my light so I could get back after my final person in line. No more than 30 seconds later, Elle comes over and snaps my light back on and tells me, "You can leave when the rush is over." To this, I turned my light off again and, having no other people in line, left while saying, "The rush is over. There's 3 or less people in all other lines." Later that day, I get pulled into T's office and told the gem that makes my MC possible, "You can't leave the register until FE manager says you can. They're the ones who judge when the rush is over, and they will turn your lane off when you can go." The statement's coupled with a disciplinary form, which he and I both sign. That includes the stated policy in the notes. Fine. Cue 2 weeks later, in grocery, stocking a freezer, call for cashiers. I'm by myself in grocery, no one else there. Second call, third call specifically asks for me in grocery. I go over the walkie and say I'm by myself. T responds that person from department will cover grocery. Fine. Go up, work the register for about 10 minutes until the rush slows down, continue working register, continue working while L goes on break, continue working register while other dedicated cashiers have no line and are doing display stocking around the registers. Continue working register until 1.5 hours have gone past. Finally, L comes over and turns off my light and says, with a crap-eating smirk, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you to go back." I head back to the grocery with the 3/4 pallet of now thawed meats, seafood, and dairy still where I was forced to leave it. Fine. Spend the next couple of days creating a log of events that can be fully supported by the wealth of cameras that are on the front end, in addition to copies of the signed disciplinary form with the policy that I followed and a written notice of resignation with stated reason for doing so, just in case. Enter HR meeting. T says I'm liable for the lost inventory and that the plan is to garnish wages to the tune of $2,500. I place the log of events and copy of disciplinary form in front of HR and say nothing. She reads both documents while T is still trying to impress upon me that I'm screwed. After a few minutes, HR lady looks at T and says he was following policy that you established that L was negligent in executing. I'll discuss this with SM when he gets in, sends me on my way. Nothing gets store manager in a worse mood than when his earnings are hurt by product loss and when he has to actually do his job. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.